The message arrived on a Tuesday. The Vethkai Dominion did not have Tuesdays. They measured time in orbital cycles and solar intervals, and a layered system of counters that had 17 levels of precision, none of which matched the Terran standard calendar. But humanity worked in Tuesdays, and so it was on a Tuesday morning, at 8:47 station time, that the most important message in 200 years of human spaceflight arrived in the inbox of Admiral Jana Reyes at Lunar Station 1. She read it at her desk, cold coffee at her elbow, a half-finished commissary sandwich that had been optimistic when she started it 3 hours ago. She read it once, then again. Then she laughed, a real, full, belly-deep laugh, the kind that does not ask permission before it comes out. She was still laughing when Lieutenant Quan, her adjutant, appeared in the doorway with the morning reports. He watched her for a long moment. "Admiral." "Come in, read this." She slid the tablet across the desk. Quan was 26 precise and had the professional gift of keeping his face calm when his brain was doing something more complicated. He picked up the tablet. He read it. He set it down. "It appears to be a formal declaration of war." "It is a formal declaration of war. They want all 12 colonies and the entire fleet dismantled. 48 hours. She stood and moved to the window. Earth hung in the deep black below the station, wide and blue, the coast of Africa just visible through a slow drift of cloud. From up here it looked peaceful. It was not peaceful. It had never been peaceful for long. That, she was beginning to think, was rather the point. They included their fleet count, Quan, right there in the message body. 4,000 warships. They listed the number as though they expected us to read it and simply stop. "It is a very large number, ma'am." "It is." She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about her grandfather, born in Manila, raised on stories of a grandmother who had lived through 3 different occupations of the same city without ever leaving. She had fed people, hidden things, and survived through the specific stubbornness of someone who had decided this was her place, and she was not going anywhere. It is the number of a people who have been winning so long they have forgotten that winning is not free, that someone has to agree to lose. She turned from the window. "Get me General Park, get the command council, and Quan." "Ma'am." "New coffee. Whatever is in that pot has been dead since the night shift." The Vethkai Dominion had been the leading military power in this region of space for 4,200 years. This was not, from a Vethkai perspective, something that required reflection. It was simply background reality, like gravity, like the cold of deep space. They had grown from a single home world to a civilization spanning 600 light years. They governed 847 species. They had fought 43 major military campaigns. They had not lost one. Their military doctrine had been refined over 4 millennia into something approaching mathematical perfection. Every ship had a role. Every formation had been tested across centuries of real conflict. Every scenario had a standard response. The system worked because it had always worked. Sub-Commander Yethar had spent 3 years trying to explain why none of this applied to what was about to happen. She was the Dominion's foremost expert on human civilization. She had read their recorded history from the very beginning. The early city-states, the empires, the collapses, the long rebuilding periods, the industrial eras, the centuries when they nearly destroyed themselves with weapons powerful enough to end their planet, and the years after that when they had walked back from the edge and kept going. She had studied their literature, their philosophy, and spent 6 months doing nothing but reading their military records. After those 6 months, she had sat alone in her quarters for 2 days before writing her first assessment. The report was long and carefully evidenced. Its core conclusion was that humanity represented a risk profile that existed nowhere in the Vethkai Tactical Library, and that the standard annexation process was not designed for a species like this one. The assessment had been filed, acknowledged, and referenced in a single sentence of the campaign briefing. Human military capacity noted as limited. Fleet size 63 warships. On the morning after the ultimatum was transmitted, she stood in High Commander Zevrath's command room and tried once more. "Their fleet is not the issue," she said. "Their fleet is what will engage our fleet," Zevrath replied. "Their fleet is the issue. Their fleet is the part we can see." She pulled up a historical file. "This species has been at war with itself for 10,000 years. Not continuously, there were long periods of peace. But the scale of their warfare, the variety of it, the methods they developed. They have fought in almost every way it is physically possible to fight. They have lost major wars, wars that nearly ended their civilization. And they came back. Every time the species came back, adapted, and continued." She changed the display to a specific conflict from their early industrial period, a small island nation facing an industrial giant. "Any reasonable analysis says this nation is finished at the end of year 1. No resources, allies gone, cities bombed every night. And yet, they fought for 4 more years and they won." She looked at him directly. "I have documented over 1,000 examples of this pattern across their history. This species does not process the threat of destruction the way other species do. It is not that they are braver. It is that they have survived enough near extinctions that some part of them does not accept extinction as a final answer. They have been here before. They know they have been here before, and they came through it." She paused. "They will not stop, High Commander." Zevrath studied the files. He was a careful officer. He sat with it for a full minute. "They have 63 ships," he said. "Yes." "We have 4,000. "Yes." At some point, the will to survive meets the reality that there is no surviving. Yethar thought about 1,000 examples, about a species that had come within hours of nuclear self-annihilation and walked back from it and kept going, and had built that near-death into a specific knowledge of itself. "We have been here before, and we are still here." "Yes, sir," she said, "of course." She left the room, not entirely certain she believed that. 3 weeks before the ultimatum was sent, an elder of the Orath civilization received an unusual message through a diplomatic back channel she had cultivated for decades. The Orath were old, older than the Vethkai by 2,000 years, and unlike the Vethkai they had chosen, long ago, to stop expanding and simply exist. They occupied 12 quiet star systems in the outer arm of the galaxy, and watched everything with the patience of those who have seen enough to know what matters. The message said, in simple terms, that the Dominion had decided to annex the human territories. Elder Saritha read it once. She sat with it for a long time. Then she sent back one line: "We advise patience. Study them before you move." The Vethkai had not responded. Saritha noted this in her records and wrote, in the section reserved for predictions, "Outcome uncertain. Whatever happens here will matter. Watch carefully." Her aides assumed it was routine caution, the old being careful about the young making young mistakes. But Saritha was thinking about something specific, something she had read in the human files years ago when she first identified them as a species worth watching. A quality that was difficult to categorize, not strength, not intelligence, not raw numbers. Refusal. Not ordinary refusal. Every species, faced with enough threat, would resist. That was biology. The Vethkai had broken that resistance in 847 species, and they had done it because at some point the resistance calculated that it could not win and accepted the math. Humanity's refusal did not do that calculation. When something was taken from them, some deep part of them registered not the impossibility of getting it back, but simply the wrong of having lost it. And that wrong sat in them and grew and did not stop growing. The Vethkai had never encountered that. She sent a second message unasked for. One line: "There is no floor." The Vethkai did not respond to that one either. She closed the file and opened her observation logs and waited to see what the universe would do with Tuesday's ultimatum. The Terran Council emergency session lasted 6 hours and 40 minutes. Reyes sat in the back as an observer and watched the full range of positions argued. Immediate diplomatic engagement, firm refusal, demands for more time, and one suggestion about counteroffers that was quickly voted down. In the end, it came to the thing it always came to. What kind of people are we? 7-2. Reject the ultimatum, prepare for armed engagement. The official response was drafted in 2 hours. Polite, professional, clear. It declined all terms. It noted that humanity's door remained open to ceasefire discussion at any time, and at the very end, after 40 minutes of Reyes arguing specifically for it, one last line: humanity does not surrender what it has built. Not a boast, not a threat, a statement of fact. She wanted it on the record. She wanted whoever was reading this on the other side, whoever had more sense than confidence, to understand what kind of people they were dealing with before the first shot was fired. After the session, she called her daughter on Proxima Colony. Her daughter answered looking tired and scared, and Reyes spent 45 minutes talking about nothing that mattered: a neighbor's dog, a recipe for dumplings, how the colony dome looked from outside on clear nights, like a lit drop of water against the dark. They did not talk about the war. They both knew it was there. When the call ended, Reyes looked at Earth through her window for a long time. Then she picked up her coffee and got back to work. Fleet Captain Marcus Cole received his orders on a Thursday and spent 20 minutes in his bunk on the *TRNS Kilimanjaro, reading them 3 times to make sure he understood exactly what Admiral Reyes was asking. Hold the Proxima defense line for 6 weeks against 4,000 ships with 63. He finished his coffee and went to the bridge. The Kilimanjaro was 22 years old and had the personality of a ship that had been through a great deal and had opinions about it. 3 sets of hull scars from 3 prior engagements. A reactor core replaced once and rebuilt twice. A weapons array that ran on a combination of standard engineering and what Cole privately considered stubbornness. She was not a beautiful ship. She was his ship, and there was no distinction he valued more. He called shipwide assembly at 900. 412 people filled every available space: the main deck, the cargo bay, corridors where the intercom could carry his voice. Engineers with grease on their hands, gunners still blinking from the early summons, medics in bay whites, the navigators. The cook from the commissary, a man named Tors who had been on the ship longer than anyone except the chief engineer, and who made a noodle soup that 3 sailors had specifically re-enlisted to have access to. All of them watching him on the platform. He said it straight. The Vethkai Dominion has declared war on Earth. They have 4,000 warships. We have 63. Battle Group 7 holds the Proxima defense line for 6 weeks while the reserve fleet finishes mobilizing. After that, we advance. He let the numbers sit. Let them do what honest numbers do when you put them in a room. 6 weeks. That is the mission. 2 seconds of silence. From somewhere deep in the cargo bay, someone said, 4,000 to 63. Finally, a fair fight. The laughter was real. Not nervous laughter, not whistling past the dark. The genuine, released laughter of people who had taken the numbers in and found the part of themselves that had always been here, the part that had been here for 10,000 years of this, and decided not to be afraid. Cole needed to know that sound was in his crew. He knew it now. Any questions? A young gunner on the port side, barely 3 years in service. What if they send more than 4,000, sir? We improvise. More laughter. Dismissed. The Vethkai advance fleet crossed into Terran space on a Saturday. 4,000 warships, tight formation, weapons charged, commanders who had run the projections 17 different ways. In all 17 versions, the Proxima defense line fell in under 14 hours. The advance to the inner colonies would begin immediately after. High Commander Zevrath stood at the viewport of his flagship as Terran space opened around them, and felt the quiet, professional satisfaction of a thing being done correctly. He checked his sensor screen. The human formation at the Proxima line resolved into detail as they closed the distance, and his tactical officer went silent for 3 full seconds before he spoke. "Sir, the human formation." "What about it?" "They are not in a defensive line." A pause. "Their clusters are angled forward, pointed toward specific points in our formation." Zevrath looked at the screen. The humans were arranged in 4 small, separated clusters, not strung across the approach waiting to absorb a blow. Aimed inward, each cluster targeting a different point in the Vethkai columns. "They are going to attack," his tactical officer said. The disbelief in his voice was not performed. 63 ships, aimed at 4,000, beginning to move forward. Zevrath thought, briefly, of Yethar's reports. They do not process the threat of destruction the way other species do. He had read those words and understood them as an academic observation. He understood them differently now, watching 63 ships accelerate toward him. He issued the advance order. And on the other side of the dark water between them, Cole's hand came down and the asterisk Kilimanjaro pushed forward and the war began. The first exchange of fire between humanity and the Vethkai Dominion lasted 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, Battle Group 7 fired first, fired precisely, and achieved something that none of the Vethkai tactical officers would fully explain in their after-action reports. They made 4,000 warships behave like they were confused. Not because the damage was overwhelming. 6 ships destroyed out of 4,000 was not overwhelming by any honest measure. The Vethkai tactical officers knew this. Their models knew this. By the numbers, 6 losses was a rounding error. What the models did not account for was where those 6 ships sat in the formation, and what removing them specifically required the rest of the fleet to do. Cole had found the gaps 3 days before the battle. During the transit from Lunar Station to Proxima, he had spent his time studying every piece of Vethkai tactical data humanity had gathered in 200 years of careful observation. Formation habits, column spacing, communication relay positions, the standard distance between ships in an advance column, which had been the same for 400 years because it worked and nothing had ever made them change it. The Vethkai had a perfect formation. That was precisely the problem. A perfect formation had been optimized so many times that it had become rigid. Every ship in a designated position, connected to the ships around it in a carefully designed structural relationship. The system was solid and the system was the point. Unless you remove the right pieces. Cole had identified 6 ships arranged at specific intervals in the left advance column. Their collective removal would require the entire left column to stop, restructure, fill the gaps correctly, and then resume. The doctrine demanded proper restructuring. You could not leave the column unbalanced. The doctrine was 4,000 years old, and it was the doctrine because it was right. That restructuring would take 30 to 50 minutes. 30 to 50 minutes in which 2,000 of the 4,000 Vethkai ships would not be moving forward. He had not told his crew this was a strategy for winning. It was not a strategy for winning. It was a strategy for delay. It was the tactical version of the whole mission, make them pay more than they planned. Keep moving. Do not stop. Buy the time that needed to be bought. Mark, Cole said. The asterisk Kilimanjaro asterisk fired. 4 other ships in the cluster fired at the same moment. The targeting was coordinated to the millisecond. Each ship assigned to a specific point on a specific target. The 6 Vethkai ships at the designated positions went dark in a chain that took less than 4 seconds. The left column buckled. The gap opened. Cole drove into it before it could close. What followed was 11 minutes of precision followed by 36 days of grinding, costly, exhausting attrition. Cole's cluster hit the gap, pushed through, then pulled back before the column could close around them. On the right flank, Two other human clusters held just outside weapons range and did not attack. They moved constantly, kept the right flank commanders nervous, demanded responses, consumed attention without spending ships. The fourth cluster had peeled away from the main engagement entirely, and was moving at speed around the outer edge of the full Vethkai fleet, toward the supply line running back into Dominion space. 4 ships, threatening 4,000 from behind. Zevrath had not been prepared for this. No doctrine in 4,000 years of warfare accounted for this. You did not position 4 ships at the rear of an enemy fleet unless you were trying to get those 4 ships killed. The humans, apparently, did not care about getting those 4 ships killed, because those 4 ships were not there to win a fight. They were there to force him to detach a rear guard, which meant pulling ships from the advance, which meant slowing the advance. He detached 200 ships to deal with them. The 4 human ships immediately ran. They stayed just outside weapons range and led the 200 Vethkai ships in a wide, looping circuit that consumed 6 full hours before Zevrath recalled the rear guard. While the rear guard was running in circles, Cole's cluster had reformed and hit another structural point in the left column. Then the right flank clusters, which had been doing nothing but looking threatening for 2 hours, moved together and hit the right column in the same surgical way. Cole had briefed his captains before the battle. His exact words had been, "You are not trying to fight them. You are trying to make them fight themselves. Every move they make in response to you is a choice about where to put their attention. Make them make choices. Make every choice cost more than it should. Add up the costs." On day 4, Battle Group 7 lost its first ship. The TRNS Monterey Bay Asterisk, a frigate that had pushed too deep into a closing Vethkai pocket while trying to reset position. Her crew of 92 escaped in 12 life pods. Cole noted the loss in his log and made sure his communications officer transmitted the full crew manifest to Fleet Command within the hour. All 92 names. He did not dwell on it. He did not allow himself to dwell on it. He added the name to the list he was keeping and went back to the work, because the work was what kept the rest of the names off the list. By day 12, Battle Group 7 had lost 7 ships. The Vethkai had lost 41. The numbers still said the Vethkai were winning. The numbers were correct, but the numbers had projected losing 4 ships by day 12. They had lost 41. And the advance that was supposed to have reached the first inner colony by week 2 was still 2/3 of the way between Proxima and its target. Strike Leader Vorith had served in the Vethkai fleet for 12 years and had participated in one prior annexation campaign. He knew what battle looked like. He knew the patterns. The smaller force fought hard for 2 or 3 days, then the losses became too large to ignore, and the smaller force made the rational choice. He was on day 18 of this campaign. The human fleet was still fighting. He had personally destroyed 4 of their ships. He had watched the battle data carefully. The humans were losing ships. Their numbers were going down. The models said they should have broken on day 10 at the latest. The models had communicated this very clearly. The models seemed not to have spoken to the humans about it. What disturbed Vorith most was not the persistence. He had been briefed on persistence. What disturbed him was the way the humans fought when they were losing. In every engagement he had ever studied, a force taking heavy losses began to shrink inward, pull back, become defensive, try to preserve what remained. That was the natural shape of an army in decline. The human fleet was not declining in shape. It was adapting. Ships that had been in the engagement for 2 weeks were fighting differently than they had in week 1. New formations, new targeting choices, moves that had not appeared in the first week because they were responses to what the Vethkai had done in weeks 2 and 3. They were learning in real time. Inside a battle they were losing, and applying the lessons in the same battle without pausing. He wrote a note in his personal engagement log. He was a strike leader, not an intelligence officer, and nobody would read it. He wrote it anyway. This enemy improves under pressure. I do not have a tactical category for this behavior. He looked at his targeting screen. Another human ship was incoming, moving through a gap in the formation that had not been a gap 30 seconds ago. He went back to work. In her intelligence office on the Eternal Dominance Subcommander Yethar wrote her 7th report in 18 days. The human formation continues to exceed all engagement projections. This is not tactical error on our part, nor is it statistical variance. This is the expected result of engaging a species with this psychological and historical profile under sustained pressure. Their resistance is not decreasing over time. It is increasing. Every day of this engagement they are better at fighting us specifically than they were the day before. Their capacity for real-time adaptive improvisation is not a variable accounted for in our models. It should be. She stopped. She chose the next sentence carefully. I am formally registering concern that the campaign timeline is not viable as currently constructed. I request an emergency review of engagement strategy before the advance continues past the current position. She submitted the report. It was acknowledged in 48 hours. It was not acted upon. On day 19, Soren woke Cole at 300 to tell him the starboard battery had taken a direct hit, and the backup relay was giving them 30% power. He followed her down to the engineering deck in his socks and a shirt that was not fully buttoned and spent 4 hours there with her and 3 of her engineers, doing the thing the Kilimanjaro had always done: find another way. They rerouted power through a secondary channel rated for atmospheric systems and absolutely not rated for weapons. Soren built a manual buffer on the spot from components that had different jobs on paper, reinforced it with 2 bracing struts from a storage rack that nobody was using, and brought the battery to 60% operation. Cole asked if 60% would hold. Soren looked at the buffer the way a sculptor looks at a piece that is not quite finished but is out of time. Weak, maybe. Don't get hit in the same place. I'll take it, he said. He noted the repair in the log as a non-standard maintenance procedure. He did not note that it voided 3 equipment warranties, because those warranties were currently not the point. He went back to his bunk and slept for 3 hours, and then got up and went back to the bridge and kept going. He did not feel heroic about any of it. He had never understood the word heroic as something separate from the word necessary. The mission was clear: hold for 6 weeks. He was on week 3. His ship was still here. 35 of his 63 ships were still here. Every morning he did the math. How many of his people were alive, how many ships were operational, how much more the Vethkai had lost than their models had prepared them for. The math was not winning math. The math was holding math. That was enough. That was what the mission asked for, and he was going to give the mission everything it asked for. In the quiet of a monitoring station 300 light-years away, Elder Saritha of the Orath watched the engagement data come in, day by day, and said nothing for a long time. On day 28, she called her communications aide. Note this in the monitoring record, she said. The Vethkai will need more time than they projected. How much more? The aide asked. Saritha looked at the numbers. The slow advance. The disproportionate Vethkai losses. The unmistakable fact that the smaller fleet was, day after day, changing the behavior of the larger one through the specific friction of never being where it was expected to be. I don't know, she said. That is what makes this worth watching. Her aide wrote it down and said nothing more, because working for Saritha for 12 years had taught him that when she said she did not know, she meant it, and that her not knowing was worth more than most people's certainty. On day 38, the reserve fleet arrived. Cole was at his bridge when the sensor contacts appeared. He counted them twice. 214 ships, fresh from Earth's inner yards, dropping into the Proxima system. He stared at the screen for 5 full seconds. Nav, he said. Ensign Cho had been on this bridge for 38 days. Her voice had a quality in it now that he had not heard since before the first shot. "Confirmed, sir. 214 contacts, all Terran markings. They're holding at the outer edge, waiting on your signal." He opened the Battle Group 7 channel. 35 ships. 35 crews who had been running on whatever the human body finds after it has used everything it normally uses and goes looking for more. "This is Cole. Reserve fleet is on screen, 214 ships." He paused for one moment. "We held." The channel erupted. He let it go for 20 seconds. He was smiling and he did not try to stop it. He let it run. Then battle stations. "All ships prepare for new orders from Fleet Command. We are not finished." Admiral Reyes' orders arrived 6 hours after the reserve fleet made contact. They were 2 words: "Advance now." The combined Terran fleet, 249 ships, including 35 battered veterans from Battle Group 7 who carried 38 days of specific knowledge about how these enemies fought, moved forward. Reyes had made one decision that Cole had requested and that some of his fellow commanders had questioned. The survivors of Battle Group 7 were at the front of the advance formation, not the rear, not the middle, the front. The logic was simple. The fresh ships had fresh systems and full crews. What they did not have was 38 days of fighting this enemy specifically, embedded in the hands and the instincts of every captain and gunner and navigator who had survived to this moment. Cole's captains knew where the gaps were, how the columns moved, how the Vethkai responded to pressure at each different point. That knowledge was worth more right now than fresh weapons, and Reyes had known it before Cole asked. The combined fleet hit the Vethkai formation at 6 structural points at once. Not the strongest points, the joints, the places where the columns met, where communication relays connected adjacent sections, where the right flank touched the rear guard. 6 points struck simultaneously across a battlefield spanning 100 light seconds, coordinated to the millisecond using a communication protocol Cole had developed with Reyes over 4 weeks of encrypted back-channel work. The Vethkai formation buckled at all 6 points at the same time. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominance High Commander Zevrath watched his tactical screen and issued the orders to stabilize. He was a good commander. He stabilized the formation, closed the gaps, absorbed the losses, and maintained the advance. His numbers still overwhelmed the human fleet by more than 15 to 1. He had stabilized before and he stabilized again. But his tactical officer was looking at the human formation data, and the expression on his face was one Zevrath had not seen before. "Sir," he said, "the ships that have been engaged for 38 days, they are leading the new formation." "Confirmed." "Yes, sir, the veterans are at the front." Zevrath looked at the screen. He sat with that for a long moment. Every doctrine he had ever studied said you rested your worn forces and led with your fresh ones. You preserved your experienced people. You kept your edge sharp. That was not what the humans were doing. Their most exhausted ships, crewed by people who had been in continuous combat for over a month, were at the sharp end of the advance. Not because they were being spent, because they were the best. Because 38 days of fighting, this enemy specifically had made them better at it than anyone else, and Reyes knew it, and she had put them where the knowing would matter most. Zevrath looked at the screen for a long time. Then very quietly he said, "Begin defensive restructuring." His tactical officer stared at him. In 30 years of service under this commander, he had never heard that order issued as an opening move. "Sir, you heard the order." Zevrath did not explain. He was still looking at the screen, at those 35 damaged, patched, veteran ships pushing forward through his formation with the calm, unhurried precision of people who had been here before and knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time since entering Terran space, he was beginning to understand that he did not fully understand what he was fighting. The advance continued. but something had shifted, and he could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. The war was not going to go the way he had planned. Reyes had been planning the counterattack since week 2 of the holding action. Not because she was confident. She was not confident. She was operating on a specific kind of faith that has nothing to do with certainty. The kind that comes from knowing what your people are capable of and deciding to trust that knowledge even when every number in front of you says it is not enough. In week 2, while Cole was doing the mathematics of delay at the Proxima line, Reyes was doing a different kind of mathematics. Earth's shipyards, the colony yards at Barnard's Star, the Epsilon Eridani station, the orbital platform above Proxima Colony B, which was 40 years old and had spent most of its life building cargo haulers and had never built a warship but had the people and the equipment and the raw material stockpiles to start. The Terran Council approved the full production request in 48 hours, which was the fastest they had agreed on anything in living memory. Not because they were not afraid, because they were afraid and had decided to do something with it. The message that went out to every shipyard in human space was 3 sentences. We are at war. We need ships. How fast? The responses came back practical and specific. The chief administrator of the Proxima orbital yard sent back a production estimate 40% above her facility's best peacetime output and attached a single note. We'll find the people. Give us the materials. Humanity gave them the materials. In 6 weeks, Earth and its colonies launched 37 new warships. Not the most sophisticated designs. There was no time for the most sophisticated designs. Ships built quickly, from existing templates, adapted for the tactical requirements that Cole had been transmitting back from the Proxima engagement in real time. Wider weapon spreads. Better point defense. Enhanced power management for the duty cycle the battle had revealed. Cole's reports from the front were not just battle logs. They were a 6-week education in Vethkai formation behavior, sent to every engineer and tactical analyst with the clearance to read them. Every gap he had found, every structural weakness he had exploited, every response the Vethkai had made that revealed something about how their doctrine worked. By the time the reserve fleet assembled, humanity knew more about how the Vethkai fought than any species had known before going to war with them. The advance hit the Vethkai formation at 6 structural points simultaneously, and the first 3 hours of it went the way Cole had told his captains it would go. Not perfectly. Nothing in a real battle goes perfectly. The TRNS Kilimanjaro took a glancing hit in the 2nd hour that took her port maneuvering thruster to 60% output, which meant Cole had to adjust his approach vectors on the fly and recalculate the timing for his cluster's 2nd strike. He did the recalculation in his head in under a minute and gave Nav the new numbers, and they kept moving. But the shape of it was right. The 6 simultaneous strikes fractured the Vethkai formation at its joints before it could brace, and the human fleet drove through the fractures the way Cole had spent 38 days learning how to do. The Vethkai response was fast. It was always fast. 4,000 years of discipline meant that when the formation was hit, the response was immediate and coordinated. Gaps were closed. Columns reformed. The advance slowed but did not stop. What was different now was that the humans were not trying to hold a line. They were pressing. Every time the Vethkai closed a gap, the human fleet found the next joint and hit it. Every time the Vethkai reformed a column, Cole's captains were already looking at the new shape of the reformation and identifying what the reformation had created. A defensive restructuring always created something. A new angle, a new gap somewhere else, a temporary weakness while the ships found their positions. 38 days of watching this enemy restructure had taught Cole's captains to read those moments before they fully formed. Commander Adisa, running a human cluster on the left flank, hit a reformation gap so precisely that his tactical officer asked afterward how he had known it was going to be there. Adisa thought about it. I didn't know, he said. I just knew they'd have to put it somewhere. That was the difference. The Vethkai doctrine told their commanders where to look. Cole's veterans had spent 38 days learning to look at the doctrine itself and find where it was going to produce the next opening. The galaxy was watching. Not loudly, not with public declarations or announced positions. The civilizations that existed in the broader neighborhood of Vethkai space had been careful and quiet for a long time, because the Dominion had 4,000 years of military history and careful and quiet had kept most of them intact. But they were watching. The Sethri Union had been a member of the Vethkai Dominion for 800 years. They had their own ships, their own space, their own government in all the ways that did not conflict with Dominion requirements. 800 years of careful compliance had built them a stable, quiet existence. They had accepted this because the alternative had always been clear. The Sethri ambassador to Dominion Command, a careful and long-serving official named Drath, watched the Proxima engagement data for 38 days and then requested a private meeting with his senior advisors. He spread the numbers across the table. The Vethkai Advanced Fleet has been engaged for 38 days against 63 human warships, he said. They have lost 103 ships. Their advance has reached 62% of the projected position. He looked around the table. The humans launched 37 new ships last week. No one spoke immediately. They are building ships faster than the Dominion is destroying them, one of his advisors said, very carefully. Yes, Drath said. Another silence. What are we doing with this information? A second advisor asked. Drath looked at the numbers for a long moment. 800 years of careful, 800 years of compliance. He had been in this role for 30 of those years and had never once imagined he would sit in this room and feel the thing he was feeling right now, which was something between hope and vertigo. We are watching, he said, very carefully, and we are waiting to see what happens next. Elder Saritha of the Orath was not just watching the engagement data. She was watching the shape of things. On day 46 of the campaign, she called her senior advisors and told them to prepare a formal contact package for the Terran government. Not an alliance offer. Not yet. Something more careful. An introduction. A signal that the Orath knew who humanity was and had been watching for a long time and did not think this war was going the way the Vethkai expected. Her advisors asked if this was wise, given the Dominion's current position. The Dominion's current position is exactly why this is the right time, she said. 4,000 years is a long time to be the only answer. Something new is happening. It is worth being on the right side of something new. She sent the contact package through a diplomatic back channel that the Dominion did not monitor, because the Dominion had never needed to monitor it and had never thought to start. Humanity received the message. Reyes read it at her desk at Lunar Station, a brief and careful communication from a civilization she had known existed but had never directly engaged with. It said, in formal language, that the Orath were aware of the conflict, had been following it with great interest, and wished to establish preliminary communication. And then, in the last line, something unusual for a formal diplomatic communication. You should know that we have read your terms offer carefully. We think it says more about what you are than anything else you have done. Reyes read that last line twice. Then she wrote back. Zevrath called for reinforcements at the end of week 7. He had held off for 3 weeks longer than any tactical analysis said he should have, which was its own kind of admission. He had held off because calling for reinforcements meant admitting that the current force was not sufficient, and for 4,000 years, the word insufficient had not been in the Vethkai military's working vocabulary. But the numbers said what they said. His advance fleet had lost 141 ships in 7 weeks. The human fleet had grown to 286. The ratio that had begun at 63-1 had compressed, through losses on one side and production on the other, to something just under 15-1. Still, a dominant advantage. Still, by any standard measure, a winning position. But the rate of change was wrong. 800 additional warships arrived from the Dominion Border Reserve in Week 8. His total force rose to 4,600 and some. The ratio opened back up. He felt the satisfaction of a commander who had identified a problem and addressed it correctly. In her quarters, Yethar received the notification of the reinforcement order and sat with it for a long time. Then she wrote her 8th report. The additional fleet deployment increases our total numerical advantage significantly. I note for the record that numerical advantage has not been the limiting factor in this engagement. The Terran fleet's advantages are behavioral and adaptive. More ships will not change the nature of the problem. It will delay the point at which the problem becomes unavoidable. The Terran fleet is growing. Their production rate has increased every week since the war began. Their tactical capability improves in direct proportion to the time they spend fighting us. These two trends combined move in only one direction. I am formally requesting that the High Commander consider a ceasefire approach before the campaign reaches the Sol system. The terms the Terrans offered at the outset remain available. Every week we do not take them, those terms become more expensive to recover. She submitted it. It was not acknowledged for 4 days. When the acknowledgement came, it said, "Report received. Continue monitoring." Yethar closed the file. She did not write a 9th report. There was nothing in a 9th report that had not been in the first 8. She had been right in all of them, and she was still being right, and nobody was reading it as anything other than a subordinate being overcautious. She opened her personal files instead. The human history data she had spent 3 years reading. She found the entry she had thought about many times since the war began. A small island nation. Cities bombed every night. 4 years of fighting something that should have been impossible to fight. She read it again. Then she closed it and went back to her monitoring work, because the work was what she had, and she was going to keep doing it correctly even if nobody was acting on it. There was a resource in any war that the Vethkai had never needed to account for. It was not in their tactical models because it could not be easily quantified. It was not ships or weapons or trained personnel. It was what happens when a civilization of 20 billion people decides the fight is personal. In Week 8, the Terran Council passed the full Mobilization Act. It was not a draft. Drafts were for moving unwilling people toward a fight. This was the opposite, clearing every pathway for people who had decided they wanted to help to find where they fit. The act created open channels between civilian expertise and military need, removed the bureaucratic barriers between the defense industry and the scientific community, and asked a very simple question of 20 billion people. What can you do? The answers came back in a volume that overwhelmed the sorting system on the first day. Engineers came. Scientists came. Civilian pilots who flew the colony supply routes came with their knowledge of space terrain that military navigation charts did not capture. Retired military came back and did not need to be retrained. Young people who had been planning to attend university came and asked to be given problems. Physicists came, not because they knew anything about weapons, but because they knew things about materials and energy that the weapons designers had not thought to ask. A team of civilian engineers at a maintenance yard on Titan, given 3 weeks, and a specific problem that Cole had identified in his engagement reports, designed a modification to the standard Terran warship's point defense system that increased its effective range by 30% against targeting patterns. The modification used existing components in a configuration that nobody in the military design department had considered because it was slightly outside standard practice. It worked. It was approved and distributed to the fleet in 72 hours. A professor of logistics at the University of New Sao Paulo read the publicly available battle data and the Dominion's own open diplomatic records and wrote a 14-page analysis. identifying 3 specific vulnerabilities in the Vethkai supply chain that the military had not noticed. She sent it to Fleet Command expecting it to be filed and forgotten. Reyes called her personally the next day. The professor's analysis became the basis for the next 3 weeks of human targeting priorities. Cole received the modified point defense specifications and the targeting priority updates on the same day and read them both carefully. The point defense modification was the work of engineers who had never designed a weapon. The supply chain analysis was the work of a woman whose career had been about transit logistics for civilian cargo. Neither of them had any formal military training. He thought about what the Vethkai's tactical models said about humanity. He thought the models counted 63 ships. He thought they forgot to count everyone else. The order to pull back to the Sol defense position arrived on the morning of day 60. Cole read it and understood it immediately. The Vethkai, with their reinforced fleet, were pushing hard toward the inner system. The battle needed to move to ground that humanity had been preparing for weeks. Deep space was where you delayed. Home was where you made them pay for getting close. He sent the order to his captains and went to find his executive officer, Commander Adisa, who was reviewing damage reports in the secondary operations room. "We're pulling back to Sol," Cole said. Adisa put down his data pad. "They'll follow. They'll follow with everything they have left. That's the point. 9 weeks of making this expensive, making it personal, making them commit more than they planned." He looked at the star map on the wall, at the small yellow dot of the sun at the center of it, at the colonies scattered outward from it like seeds. "Now we make them pay for getting close enough to see it." Adisa was quiet for a moment. His face had the look of a man doing a calculation he did not entirely want to do. Then it settled into something simpler, something that was not quite a smile but was the shape of one. "Their problem," he said. Cole issued the pullback order. The fleet turned toward home. Behind them, 4,600 Vethkai warships followed. Ahead, Earth waited the way it had always waited, old and scarred, and full of people who had been through the fire before, and had never stopped finding reasons to come back. The last part of the war was beginning. The Vethkai fleet reached the edge of the Sol system on the 61st day of the war. From Earth they were not yet visible to the naked eye. They were data on screens, lights on sensor arrays, numbers moving across tactical displays. But 20 billion people knew they were coming. The planet had spent 9 weeks preparing for this in the specific way a civilization prepares when most of its people are not soldiers, and all of them have decided the fight is theirs anyway. Factories running double shifts, shipyards lit through the night. Families in apartments watching news feeds and not talking about what the numbers meant. Cities very quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet, the quiet of people who are paying attention. Admiral Reyes had been sleeping in her office for 2 weeks. She was not working every hour. She had tried very hard not to work every hour, because she had learned enough about command to know that exhausted decisions were bad decisions, and she had too many people depending on her decisions to let them be bad. She slept 4 hours at a stretch and ate proper meals, and made herself take a 30-minute walk along the station's observation corridor every morning before the briefing started. She did these things deliberately, as acts of professional discipline. She slept in her office because leaving it felt wrong in a way she could not precisely explain. Because the screens were there and the data was there, and the people making decisions based on her guidance were there, and she needed to be close to it even when she was not working. Because this was her watch, and you did not go far from your watch. The human fleet was positioned at the outer edge of the Sol system. 291 ships now, the latest batch of new construction having arrived 3 days before, including 6 heavy cruisers that had been on the slipways when the war started and had been finished in 7 weeks, which was 4 weeks ahead of any previous record in the history of Terran shipbuilding. The yards had not stopped. The people had not stopped. The ratio stood at just over 15-1. Still impossible math by any standard measure. Still the kind of numbers that, if you showed them to someone who did not know what the last 9 weeks had been, would look like a foregone conclusion. Reyes had stopped doing the math 3 weeks ago, not because it was wrong, because it was no longer the point. Cole received his position assignment on the morning of day 61 and went for a walk through the ship. Not an inspection. He knew the ship's exact state without inspecting it. He walked the decks because he had learned many years ago that before a large engagement his crew performed better if they had seen his face. Not a speech, not a briefing, just his presence moving through the spaces they lived and worked in, visible and calm. It was a small thing. It cost him an hour. He had never once regretted it. He stopped in the engineering bay and spent 20 minutes with Soren, who was bent over a modified weapons relay she had been refining for the last week. The modification came from a materials science paper she had downloaded from the Public Research Network, written by a professor at a university on Earth whose entire career before the war had been about stress tolerance in transit infrastructure. Nothing to do with weapons. Everything to do with how materials behave under heat and pressure at the molecular level. Soren had read it, understood something in it that the professor had not intended, and turned it into a modification that increased the relay's heat tolerance by 12%. 12% meant the weapon's battery could sustain fire for longer before the relay needed to cycle down. In a sustained engagement, the difference between being in the fight at minute 40 and not being in the fight at minute 40 was not a small difference. "It's holding," Soren told him, not looking up from the relay. "Good," he said. "Don't get hit in the relay housing. I'll add it to the list." He walked the rest of the decks, the gunners, the medics, the navigation team running approach calculations for positions they hoped they would not need. Tours the cook, who had made coffee for 400 people and had a look on his face of someone who had decided that making good coffee today was the thing he could do, and he was going to do it as well as it had ever been done. Cole drank the coffee. It was very good. He went back to the bridge. He had 4 hours before the projected first contact window. He sat at his station and wrote a message to his daughter, who was 16 and living with her mother in a coastal city on Earth. He had sent her a message before every significant engagement for 2 years, and she had never once asked him to stop, which told him something important about her. He wrote, "Doing my job, proud of you. I'll see you when this is over." He believed that. He was not certain it was true. He sent it anyway because the belief was real even if the certainty was not, and she deserved the real thing. He closed the message. He looked at his tactical screen. He had 4 hours. He used them to go over the plan one more time. At 14:23 hours on day 61, the advance columns crossed the outer boundary of the Sol system. The battle began. Cole's cluster hit first, the way it had always hit first. The Kilimanjaro and the 5 ships around her drove into the gap between the Vethkai lead column and its adjacent support column, with the specific, practiced precision of a team that had been doing this exact kind of thing for 61 days. The lead column fired at where they had been. The * Kilimanjaro fired at where they needed to fire. 3 Vethkai ships at the front of the lead column went dark. The column buckled. On the right flank, Adisa hit the corresponding point in the right column 1 second later. 2 more Vethkai ships down. The right column buckled in the same way. Both flanks fractured in the first 8 minutes. It was not as clean as Cole had planned. It never was. A Vethkai heavy cruiser that was supposed to be occupied with Adisa's cluster broke formation and drove directly at the * Kilimanjaro *. And Cole had to pull the ship up and over in a maneuver that used the thruster assembly in a way Soren would have opinions about later. And the near miss left a long scorch along the upper hull that added one more line to the ship's long autobiography. But the shape held. The 6 simultaneous strikes at 6 structural points, The plan Rays had spent 3 weeks building from Cole's engagement data and the civilian professor's supply chain analysis, and every piece of battle-earned knowledge the fleet had accumulated the shape of it held. The Vethkai formation fractured, and the human fleet drove through the fractures. In the city on the coast, Sophia Cole sat on the roof of her building with her mother and watched the sky. She knew the battle had started. The news feeds said so. The tactical displays that civilians were not supposed to fully understand but could see the shape of showed the Vethkai mass and the smaller human cluster, and the way the gap between them was changing. She could read the shape even if she could not read the numbers. She watched the sky because it was what she could do. She was 16 and she was not a soldier, and she was not an engineer, and she had no skills that the war needed. She was someone's daughter, and she was watching the sky because the sky was where her father was, and looking at it felt like the only honest thing. The rooftop was crowded. Her neighbors had brought chairs up. Someone had brought a small portable heater. Someone else had brought food that nobody was eating. The whole city was doing some version of this, she knew. 15 million people in this city alone, most of them looking up at a sky that told them nothing specific, because looking up was all that was available. Her mother held her hand, and they did not talk about the numbers on the feeds. Sophia had read her father's last message 11 times. She knew this because she had counted. "I'll see you when this is over." She held the phone in her other hand and watched the sky, and did not allow herself to think about what "when this is over" required. Zevrath stabilized. He was a good commander, and stabilizing was what good commanders did when their formation took damage. Close the gaps, reform the columns, absorb the losses, and maintain the advance. His fleet still outnumbered the humans by more than 15-1, and he had stabilized under worse pressure than this in prior campaigns. But something in this engagement was not the same as prior campaigns, and he could feel it in the data the way you feel a change in temperature before you can name what it means. The human fleet was faster than it had been at Proxima, not faster in raw speed, the specifications had not changed, faster in response. The time between a Vethkai action and a human counter had been compressing for 9 weeks, and at Sol the compression was visible. His formation would close a gap, and a human cluster would be exploiting the new shape of the closure before the closure was complete. His columns would reform, and a human ship would already be moving toward the angle the reformation had created. They were not predicting his moves. They were reading his doctrine faster than the doctrine could produce the moves, and responding to where the doctrine was going before it arrived. He had spent 9 weeks teaching them how his fleet fought. He understood that now. Every engagement, every response, every restructuring, they had been reading all of it, filing all of it, building a specific understanding of the Vethkai way of war that lived now in the hands of his enemies, commanders, the way a craftsman's knowledge lives in their hands. He called Yethar to the command room. She was there in 4 minutes. She had clearly been awake. He did not ask how she knew to be ready. He said, "Tell me what you see." She looked at the battle data for a long moment. "They know our doctrine," she said, "not from intelligence gathering, from 61 days of being in it. Their response patterns are not calculated. They're reflexive now. Their captains feel where the next opening will be before it exists." She paused. "We taught them this. Every engagement we ran against them was a lesson, and they never stopped learning." "What do I do with that?" It was not quite a question. It was the voice of a commander asking out loud what he already knew. "You cannot unteach them," she said. "You cannot make them forget what 61 days in this fight has put in their bodies." She looked at the screen. The human clusters moving through his formation with the ease of people navigating a familiar room. "The only thing that changes this equation is if we stop giving them new lessons." "Meaning?" "Meaning ceasefire," she said. "Now, before this goes further." Zevrath looked at the battle data. His advance was still moving. He was still winning by the numbers. He looked at the rate at which the numbers were changing and did the calculation he had been avoiding for 3 weeks. He did not answer her. "High Commander," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I have sent 8 reports. I have been correct in all 8. I am asking you to read the 9th one before I write it." He was quiet for a long time. "Then bring up the reserve deployment interface." She looked at him. She saw what he was going to do. She did not argue. She had learned across 8 reports when argument was useful and when it was not. "Yes, sir," she said and stepped back. He committed the full Dominion reserve. The sensor screen in front of him filled with new contacts. 6,200 warships in total, against 291. He stared at the ratio and felt it the way he should have felt it, not as reassurance, as a statement about what the last 9 weeks had cost him, that he needed this many ships to feel sure. On Lunar Station 1, Reyes looked at the new contacts appearing on her tactical screen and sat with the number for a long time. 6,200. Her tactical officer was very still. She had been here before, in the sense that she had spent 9 weeks preparing for the possibility that the enemy would throw everything at them. She had plans for it. Good plans. Plans built from 61 days of specific knowledge and 20 billion people's worth of contributed thinking. She had also, privately, hoped they would not do it. She stood. She walked to the communications console and opened the all-frequency broadcast channel. Not military, not encrypted. Every frequency the Vethkai ships could receive. She spoke in standard Terran. She knew they had translators. "This is Admiral Jana Reyes, commander of the Terran fleet." She kept her voice level, not hard, not afraid, the voice of someone who means exactly what they say and nothing more. "We note the addition of your reserve forces to this engagement." A pause of 2 seconds, deliberate. "Our door remains open." She closed the channel. Her tactical officer turned to look at her. "Admiral." "Get me Cole," she said. "And get me the captains of every ship in the 6th construction batch. We have work to do." She sat back down. She looked at 6,200 lights on her screen. She thought about her grandfather's grandmother in Manila, who had watched an occupying force arrive and had fed people and hidden things and stayed exactly where she was, because this was her place, and she had decided that a long time ago, and the decision had not changed. Reyes had made her own version of that decision a long time ago. She picked up her coffee and pulled up the targeting priority analysis and started working. The battle ran through the night and into the following day. At hour 9, the Kilimanjaro took a direct hit on the lower port quarter that blew out the secondary hull plating on Deck 7 and sent 5 crew members to the medical bay. Cole had a damage report in his hands within 3 minutes. He read it, confirmed that all 5 crew were alive, and sent the damage assessment to Soren with a single line. "What do we still have?" Soren's response came back in 11 minutes. "Everything that matters. Keep flying." He kept flying. At hour 14, Cole was doing the thing he always did in sustained combat, looking at the data from a slight remove, letting his tactical brain work on the shape of the engagement rather than the individual pieces of it, when he noticed something in the Vethkai response intervals. They were slower. Not by much. A fraction of a second longer to close a gap than an hour before. A formation adjustment that should have taken 45 seconds taking 60. Tiny numbers. Easy to miss if you were not looking for them. Easy to discount if you saw them but had never spent 61 days specifically learning to read this enemy. Cole was looking for them. He had been looking for them since Admiral Reyes had written to him 2 weeks ago. Every war has a moment when the math stops being the thing that matters. Watch for it. "Tactical," he said. "Sir." "Run the Vethkai response intervals for the last 20 minutes and compare to hour 1. A pause, the sound of calculations being run. Then, "Sir, they're degrading. Average response time is up 11%. Not collapsing, not breaking, degrading. The enormous ancient machine of the Vethkai fleet, running on 4,000 years of doctrine, showing for the first time the specific kind of strain that comes from being pushed to do something the machine was not built for 9 weeks, and then another day. Cole opened the fleet channel. All captains, look at Vethkai response intervals last 20 minutes, compare to baseline, confirm what tactical is showing me. The confirmations came in over the next 4 minutes, one by one, every captain reading the same numbers, every captain understanding what the numbers meant. He leaned forward, prepare coordinated strike, all ships, target package Foxtrot. Target package Foxtrot was the plan Reyes had built for a specific moment, not a moment of the enemy breaking, but the first moment of the enemy slowing. The first crack. You did not need a break. You needed a crack, and you needed to be ready for it when it came, and you needed every ship in the fleet to hit it at once. They had been ready for 3 weeks. On my mark, Cole said, all ships. He looked at the 6,000 lights on his screen, at the crack in the enormous machine that had taken 61 days and 9 weeks of grinding, and 20 billion people's worth of stubbornness to put there. Mark 291 human ships fired together. For the first time in 4,000 years of Vethkai military history, the advance stopped. Not retreated, not broken, stopped. And on the roof of a building in a coastal city on Earth, a 16-year-old looked up at a sky that was not giving her any information and held her mother's hand and kept looking anyway, because her father was up there, and she was not going to stop watching until she saw him come home. The crack did not become a collapse in an hour. It became 1 in 14. Zevrath was too experienced for a full collapse. He pulled back. He consolidated. He closed his formation into a tighter core and accepted the sacrifice of the outer columns, which was the doctrine for a fleet that had taken unexpected pressure and needed to stabilize. He had done this before. It had always worked before. What had never happened before was that the enemy followed the consolidation as fast as it happened. Cole's captains did not pause to assess the new formation shape. They moved into the contraction as it occurred, finding the angles the consolidation produced before the consolidation was complete. The knowledge was in their hands now, 62 days and 14 hours of specific, accumulated, irreplaceable knowledge about how this fleet moved when it was hurt. They did not need to calculate. They read it the way you read a familiar face. Zevrath closed one gap and 2 others opened. He closed those and the pressure came from a different angle. He restructured his left column, and the right column was hit before the left column had finished moving. The machine was working correctly. The doctrine was being followed precisely. The doctrine was producing the openings that were killing his ships. He had built a perfect system over 4,000 years. The system was perfect. The enemy had spent 62 days learning the system well enough to use it against him. He stood at his command screen and watched the numbers and did not look away from them, because he was the kind of commander who believed you owed it to your people to look at the truth of a situation clearly, even when the truth was something you had spent 9 weeks refusing to accept. The truth was this: he was not losing the war the way he had expected to lose it if he lost it. He was not being overwhelmed by superior firepower or superior numbers. He was being worn down by an enemy that had turned his own patterns into weapons and did not stop, and had never stopped, and was not going to stop. He thought about Yethar's first report. 3 years ago, before the campaign, before the ultimatum, before any of this. There is no floor. That was what the Oreth message had said. He had not known what it meant then. He understood it now in the specific, visceral way you understand a thing when you are standing inside it. They did not find the floor. There was no floor to find. Every cost he imposed on them they absorbed and converted into fuel. Every week of this war they had come back harder and more specifically dangerous than the week before. He had brought 6,000 ships to the edge of their home system and stopped their advance for the first time in 4,000 years. He had run out of options that did not end in a place he did not want to go. He turned to the communication station. "Open a channel to Terran Fleet Command," he said. "Command frequency, authenticated." His communications officer did not hesitate. He had been watching the battle data for 14 hours. He opened the channel in 15 seconds. Zevrath waited. Reyes received the communication request at 6:14 on day 62. She had been awake for 4 hours. She had eaten breakfast. She had taken her morning walk along the observation corridor and looked at the stars and thought about nothing useful for 30 minutes, because sometimes nothing useful was what the brain needed before it could do what came next. The request came through on command frequency, authenticated. High Commander Zevrath, Vethkai Dominion Advance Fleet. She opened the channel. "Admiral Reyes," he said. "High Commander," she said. The translator worked in both directions. They were speaking two entirely different languages and hearing each other clearly, and she thought briefly that there was something in that worth holding onto, though she was too tired to chase it into a metaphor right now. A pause, longer than a communications delay, explained. "You said," he began, "in your broadcast yesterday that your door remained open." "I did," she said. "Did you mean it?" It was not quite a question. She heard the thing underneath it, a commander of 4,000 years of unbroken history asking a woman he had spent 9 weeks trying to destroy whether she had meant an offer of peace, whether it was genuine or tactical, whether humanity was the kind of people who said the door was open and meant it. "I meant it from the first message we sent," she said. "I have meant it every time I have said it. I mean it now." Another pause. "I would like to discuss terms," he said. She held that for one moment. Not for drama. She was not a dramatic person. She was someone who had wanted this since before the first shot was fired, who had written it into every official communication and said it over open channel in the hardest hours of the hardest battle of her life, because she had always known that the door was only worth something if it was actually open. "Tell me what you're offering," she said. The Vethkai had prepared standard terms before leaving Dominion space. They were the terms a great power offered a smaller one that had proven more costly than projected. Return of 2 colonies as a concession, reduced fleet size requirements, a governance oversight agreement that left the Dominion in a supervisory role, generous by Dominion standards, structured to leave the relationship intact with the Dominion still at the top of it. Reyes read the offer. She set it down. "These are not terms we'll accept," she said. A silence. Then, "We are offering significant concessions, Admiral." "You are," she said. "I understand that, and I want you to know I take it seriously, but those are not the terms." She pulled up the document she and the Council had prepared 3 weeks ago, when the shape of the war had begun to clarify and she had started to believe, carefully, without saying so out loud that this conversation might actually happen. "Here is what we're asking." She transmitted it. On the Eternal Dominance asterisk, Zevrath read it. He read it twice. It was not what he expected. It was not punitive. It was not the terms of a victor pressing advantage over a defeated enemy. It did not strip territory from the Dominion. It did not demand reparations that would take generations to pay. It did not ask for submission or for any ongoing relationship in which the Vethkai answered to humanity. It had 3 conditions. First, full, permanent, legally embedded recognition of Terran sovereignty across all 12 current colonies and all future human-settled territory. Not a negotiation, not a term that could be revisited. A fact written into Dominion law, that human space was human space and would remain so. Second, a mutual non-aggression agreement enforced not by Dominion oversight but by a joint commission that included neutral third parties. The Oreth had already agreed to serve in this role. Reyes had contacted them 2 weeks ago. Third, the immediate right of any species currently under Dominion governance to hold a referendum on the question of sovereignty. Zevrath read the third term 3 times. You are asking us to allow our member species to vote on independence, he said. Any that want to, Reyes said. Not all of them will, some will vote to stay, but any species that wants to ask the question gets to ask it. This will change the structure of our dominion significantly. It might, she was quiet for a moment, or it might make it something that people choose to be part of instead of something they stay in because they have no other option. How that goes is your work to do. I think you can do it if you decide to. She paused. We don't want to destroy you, High Commander. We have never wanted to destroy you. We want to exist. We want to build things and keep what we build and go where we decide to go. That is all we have ever wanted. A long silence. You want to exist, he said. We want to exist, she said, and we think other people should have the chance to make that same choice. The silence stretched. She let it stretch. She had said the true things and there was nothing to add to the true things. I will need to consult with the High Council, he said. Take the time you need, she said. We will hold our position. She closed the channel and sat back and looked at the ceiling of her office for a long time. Then she called her daughter on Proxima Colony B and told her it was almost over. The ceasefire agreement was signed 66 hours later. Reyes signed for humanity. Zevrath signed for the Dominion. Elder Saritha of the Orath, 300 light-years away, witnessed the agreement by long-range authenticated communication, because she had been watching since before the first shot, and it was right that she see the end. When the final confirmation came through, Saritha sat in silence in her monitoring station for a long time. Then she turned to her senior aide and said, "Send notification to all Orath observation posts. Mark this date in the primary record." She thought for a moment. Noted as follows: today the Vethkai Dominion engaged something it could not outlast, and the thing it could not outlast when it won asked for this. She transmitted a copy of the 3 terms to her aide. Read the third one carefully, she said. They won a war for their survival, and the first thing they did with the winning was extend the question to people they had never met. She looked out at the stars. She had been watching humanity for decades. She had sent the Vethkai 2 warnings they had not read. She had written in the long record that this species was something the galaxy had not seen before, and she had meant it as a tactical observation and as something more. Now she understood the something more. It was not the fighting. Other species had fought as hard and as long. It was not the stubbornness. The stubbornness was remarkable, but it was not unique. It was what they had done when the stubbornness was no longer needed. When the door finally opened and they walked through it with the terms in their hands. They had spent 10,000 years fighting each other, spending enormous cost on survival, on territory, on the right to exist. And when they had won the biggest fight of their spacefaring history, when they had the leverage to demand almost anything, they had written 3 lines. We want to exist. We want what we built. And we want others to have the chance to decide for themselves. She added 1 more line to the long record. Watch this species. They are not finished. They are, I think, only beginning. And how they begin matters, because beginners who start like this tend to carry it forward. She closed the record. In Dominion space, 847 species received a notice of referendum. Most of them read it 2 or 3 times. Some of them did not fully understand it at first. All of them understood, eventually, that a species they had never met had won a war against the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, and had spent one of their 3 conditions on people they had no obligation to. Some of those species would vote to stay with the Dominion. Some would not. All of them would remember. Cole received the ceasefire notification at 8:31, while the Asterisk Kilimanjaro was running a full damage assessment in the aftermath of 62 days of war. The ship had 14 new hull scars. Deck 7 had a patched section where the lower port plating had been blown out 2 days ago. The port maneuvering thruster was at 73% following the near miss on the first day of the Sol engagement. Soren had a list of 17 repairs she wanted to begin immediately and 3 that she called urgent, which from Soren was the equivalent of an emergency alarm. Cole read the ceasefire notification. He sat with it for a while. He had been sitting with large things quietly for 62 days. He was good at it now in a way he had not been before the war. The quiet that follows an enormous thing is its own kind of work, and he gave it the time it needed. Then he opened the shipwide channel. "Attention all crew," his voice was steady. He was tired in a way that went past the body and into the deeper parts of you, the parts that run everything else, but the steadiness was real. "Ceasefire has been confirmed. The war is over." A pause. "Stand down from battle stations. Begin damage assessments. Get food. Get sleep." He stopped. He was not good at speeches. He had never been good at speeches, and he had never pretended to be. He said the thing he needed to say the only way he knew how to say it. You held the line when it needed holding. You advanced when it needed advancing. You adapted every day to something that had never been done before, and you kept going when keeping going was the only thing on the table. 22 ships lost. 174 names I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure are not forgotten. Another pause. I don't have better words than this. You were everything this ship needed you to be. That's all. He closed the channel. A message came in 4 minutes later from Addisa, on the *TRNS Mombasa *, 50 kilometers off the port side. 4 words. "Told you their problem." Cole read it and laughed. A real one. The first real laugh in 62 days. He sat alone on the bridge of a 22-year-old ship that had been through more than any ship deserved and laughed until his eyes were wet, and he did not try to stop it. Then he filed his final battle report. He listed the losses first. 22 ships, 174 names in full, one by one, with rank and colony of origin and years of service. He had been doing this since the first loss, and he did it now the same way he had done it every time, because the names were not a statistic, and he was not going to treat them as one. Then he wrote, "Battle Group 7 held the Proxima defense line for 38 days against a force outnumbering us by more than 60 to 1. We advanced for 23 days after. Total engagements, 44. The crew performed beyond any assessment I could write about them, so I will not try. I am proud of every name in this report, the living and the dead alike." He submitted it. He called Soren and asked where she wanted to start on the repairs. She told him Deck 7, and he went down to Deck 7 and spent the next 3 hours working alongside her, because the ship needed fixing and he had 2 hands and some time. Yethar wrote her final report 4 days after the ceasefire. She sat in her quarters on the Eternal Dominance with the battle records open on one screen, and the human history files she had spent 3 years reading open on another, and she wrote, 9 weeks and 2 days of active engagement. Total Vethkai losses, 412 ships. Total Terran losses, 29 ships. The numerical disparity at engagement start was greater than 63 to 1. The final ratio at ceasefire had compressed to approximately 21 to 1. The compression was driven by 3 factors: Terran production increase, Vethkai losses, and Terran tactical improvement over the course of the engagement. All 3 factors moved in the same direction and accelerated. She stopped. She looked at what she had written. Then she wrote the part that was not a tactical assessment. "I have spent 3 years studying this species. I was correct in 8 reports about their capabilities and the nature of the risk they represented. I believe I was correct because I was reading their history carefully, which showed a consistent pattern. Under sufficient pressure, the Terran species does not degrade. It improves. It finds resources in itself that no external assessment would have predicted. It converts opposition into information and uses the information without pausing. What I did not fully anticipate, because I did not know to look for it, was what they would do when the pressure was no longer necessary. The third term of the ceasefire agreement has no tactical value for the Terran species. It does not expand their territory or their fleet or their security. It costs them nothing to exclude it and gains them nothing measurable to include it. They included it anyway. I have been trying to understand why for 4 days. I think the answer is that, for humanity, winning and what you do with winning are not separate questions. The 10,000 years of warfare in their history did not make them want to impose on others. It made them want others to have what they fought for, the right to decide. I do not have a tactical category for this. I am not certain a tactical category is the right frame. I wrote 8 reports warning that this species was unlike anything in our library. I was thinking about their capacity for war. I should have also been thinking about their capacity for what comes after it. She submitted the report. She sat back and looked at the human history files still open on her screen. The island nation. The 4 years of fighting something that should have been impossible. She had read that file 100 times as evidence of what humanity would do when it was losing. She read it now, for the first time, as evidence of what humanity was when it was winning too. They had come back every time. They had always come back. And every time they came back they built something, not just weapons and ships and defenses, but something else, something harder to measure. Some accumulation of understanding about what it cost to survive and what that cost obligated you to. You spent that cost, and then you tried to make sure others did not have to. She closed the file. On the roof in the coastal city, at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning that was not so different from a Tuesday morning 9 weeks ago, Sophia Cole's phone buzzed. She had been up since before dawn. She had not slept well. She had been watching the news feed since midnight and had seen the ceasefire confirmation at 2:31 and had cried for a long time and then stopped and then cried again. And then her mother had made tea and they had sat together in the kitchen until the sky started to change. The message was from her father. War's over. Ship needs repairs. 3 weeks, maybe 4. A pause in the message log that meant he had stopped and started again. Tell you about it when I'm home. Proud of you. I'll see you soon. She read it 3 times. Then she went to the roof. The sun was coming up over the water, doing what it had always done, indifferent to the 62 days that had just happened and carrying on regardless, because the sun did not need to know what had happened to keep being the sun. The city below her was waking up. She could hear it. The slow sounds of 15 million people starting an ordinary morning for the first time in 9 weeks. She looked at the sky. It was very blue, very old, full of stars you could not see in the daylight but that were there anyway, the way things are there even when you cannot see them. Her father was up there somewhere on a ship that needed 3 weeks of repairs, already filing reports and checking damage and drinking whatever Tors had made in the commissary. He had done his job. He had always done his job. He was coming home. She looked at the sky for a long time. Somewhere in it, things were different now. Not because a war had been won, wars had been won before by everyone, and the winning had not always meant much. Different because of what had been asked for in the winning. Because a species that had spent 10,000 years learning every way to fight had looked at the moment when it had leverage over something vast and old and powerful and had written 3 lines. The third one the most important. Anyone who wants to ask the question gets to ask it. The galaxy was going to be sorting out what that meant for a very long time. Sophia did not know any of this specifically. She was 16, and she was standing on a roof watching a sunrise, holding her phone with her father's message on the screen. She knew her father was coming home. For now, that was the whole world, and it was enough.